on Online for Authors, I'm chatting with Joseph Bolton, author of Old Grandmother's Tree. Welcome, Joseph.
Oh, hello, Terry. Welcome. I'm happy to be here today.
I am so excited to have you. The book was really incredible. I enjoyed it. But before we dive in, I want you to give listeners just like a quick idea of what they're going to find when they open up the cover of Old Grandmother's Tree.
Okay, so Old Grandmother's Tree, as of right now, is actually 3 volumes. Old Grandmother's Tree, Volume 1, 2, and then Dance of Creation, which is a continuation of the book series, same universe. So I call that Volume 3. So what it is a folklore style retelling of the story of my French-Canadian ancestors back in the 17th century and the early 20th century, and as well as my Algonquin ancestor who lived in the mid-1600s in Quebec, and her name was Marie Mate Wiawagwe. And she is
say that 3 times fast.
Yes, it is. It's a hard name to say. And she is the epitomous old grandmother of the Old Grandmother's Tree. She's like the root and the tree trunk that ties all the stories together.
Yeah, I found it fascinating. But before we even get into the details of the story, what made you decide, hey, French Canadian folk tales, that's the way I'm going?
Well, I think it was kind of a merging of several things. First of all, as a child, I was always interested in family history.
Right.
Where did we come from? And, growing up in the 60s and 70s, we didn't have a lot of the tools we have now to research that. But, I knew we came from Quebec. That's all we knew. But later on, I discovered, the full range of my ancestors using Ancestry.com. I used DNA tests. I gave DNA tests to my mom and my siblings. And that's where we discovered that we had Native American roots. And so science found my old grandmother first. And then it took about 2 years effort. I was actually able to find my connection to her. And I found four Native American gateway ancestors. And the story of Marie Mate Wiawagwe was very inspiring. And that kind of became the inspiration for it. And so that's one aspect. And the other aspect is I've always loved folk tales and mythology. And so I kind of combined it together and had it fully illustrated working with a young woman named Natasha Pelly Smith out of Toronto. So people have written books about their ancestors before, especially if they have well-known ancestors. It's very common. But what makes this unique is that we didn't necessarily have to stick to a perfect reality narrative, but we used trickster animal characters inspired by Native American folktale. We have magic in the stories as well, but we have real historic people acting in this kind of magic world of old Quebec. And it's also fully illustrated. It's almost a graphic novel. It's not a graphic novel, but there is almost a full color illustration on every page of the books. So it's very unique.
It is very unique. Let's talk quickly about the illustrations. How did you find your illustrator, and how much input did you have, or did you just kind of let your illustrator go for it?
Oh, no, actually, it was kind of a 2-step process. I worked initially with a storyboard artist. Her name was Masami Kiyono. She's a young woman that lives in Manhattan. And so she storyboards commercials, TV commercials. Mm-hmm. And so we worked together going through the text, and we talked together on a Zoom call, and we say, let's put an illustration here. We'll have this illustration showing kind of this happening in the story.
Okay.
And she would do rough sketches. And so we storyboard the whole thing out, just like you were doing a movie. Like a movie, you do the same thing. You'd storyboard a movie. So once that process is complete, then I went to Natasha Pelly Smith. Now, I found her just sheer luck, and it's amazing luck. I just Googled, I wanted an illustrator from Canada because I wanted that cultural context. She was the first name that popped up. We did a Zoom call. We hit it off. And now we've been working together for like 2.5 years. Creating these books. So I bring this story with those storyboards to Natasha, and we go through the same process again. We talk about each illustration, and she makes suggestions about ways she wants to tweak it a little bit. And she adds the color, but more than just color, she adds a dimensionality to it. You look like you see a dimensional picture in there. So it's very much a collaborative process between the three of us in developing these illustrations, but we do it together. Now I can't draw at all. I can't draw a straight line with a ruler. So I rely on these two talented young women to help me do this. But I very much give my input about what I think, but I'm also open to their ideas as well.
Right.
So it's kind of a collaborative process.
The colors are unbelievable. Like I'm a real color freak. I absolutely love color, like pops of color, and these colors were so rich and so beautiful and translated so well into the print. It's just they're beautiful. That alone should win you awards. I mean, those are some gorgeous, and I love your cover of volume 1. It just everything is just beautiful.
Oh, it is. It really came out well. It was a very laborious process because it takes a while. We had probably, I think last counted up, like almost 500 illustrations between those first two books. And now we're looking at probably 600 illustration, which you add the recently released Dance of Creation book. So that's 600 full color illustrations. Each one requires, a significant amount of time to complete.
Absolutely. And they are truly, guys, you've got to look at these. These illustrations are incredible. Some of my favorite parts are the trickster animals. And I think the reason why I like the trickster animals is because I have found trickster animals in other cultures as well. So the African culture has trickster animals, with the spider, and there's trickster animals throughout the world in different cultures, kind of trying to explain the unexplainable. And it's, the animals are doing it. And I love that you brought that into the story. I guess when you're thinking about, hey, I'm going to essentially write family history with a little bit of a twist, and then the idea to bring in trickster animals, I still am trying to wrap my head around like how you decided to do that. That would have never come to me.
Well, I think you hit on it a little bit because trickster animal characters are found throughout the world.
Yeah.
Mythology and folktales everywhere.
Yeah.
And we and TV and films today, trickster characters are very common. Cartoons, Bugs Bunny. Bugs Bunny is a classic trickster character modeled on that type. If you look at more modern TV, George Costanza from Seinfeld, very much a trickster character. And a trickster character, kind of functions as a protagonist that kind of pokes the story and pokes the people around them and gets something started, gets the story started, makes something happen, makes some mischief. They cause mischief for other people, other characters, but they also bring mischief on themselves as well. And so I kind of took that archetype and created these trickster characters that were very much inspired by North American, First Nations, Native American types. And the names are from Algonquin and Ojibwe language, the names of the characters, the trickster characters. But when you get to know them, you realize that they all have their unique personalities. They're not just one dimensional.
Right.
They have their foibles, they have their strengths, they have their weaknesses. And they kind of help drive the story, but they also function kind of a mirror for us. And they kind of like bring out other traits in the other more human characters in the story.
Absolutely. I've always been enthralled with folk tales, especially folk tales from other countries, and just like how it is they're trying to do their teaching. Most folk tales are being told to teach a lesson, to help you understand something you can't understand, to help you understand the way weather works, or, the way human nature is, or whatever it is they're trying to get across. And so I love to go into other cultures and find that. So this was very fascinating to me. And, the bear and the one they come and they steal the pies and all the things. I just think that that's fabulous. I really enjoyed that. How much research did you have to do in order to get this to do what it did?
Well, from my ancestor, Marie Matei Wiawagwe, Algonquin woman. There was another man named Norman Lavalley, who's also a descendant of this woman. And about 35 years ago, he did research on her life. And actually, her life was very well documented by the Jesuit priests who lived up in Quebec. And so we know approximately when she was born. She was married. Her first husband was an Algonquin named Assababish. They had 2 small children. And around the time that she was 22, she lost her husband and her 2 children to an attack by the Mohawks. And then 5 years later, she married a French settler named Pierre Cauque, and they became my ancestors. So all this story of hers was documented. And so I had that part of it. Yeah. And then the other part was just researching, like the culture, the clothing that people wore back in that time period in the 1600s. For example, where did First Nation people in Quebec, what kind of homes did they live in? What kind of clothing did they research? So that kind of research went in there. And I think that we're very proud about the way, Natasha and I are very proud of the way it came out and how their characters are portrayed, the native characters and the French Canadian settlers, how they were also portrayed in the story. So there was a lot of research on that. But probably the key piece of all of it that really tied it together was at the end of my ancestor's life, Marie Matei Wiawagwe, when she died in 1699, the priest of Trois-Rivières wrote about her a very brief eulogy. And he said, Marie Matei Wiawagwe lived a full life with dignity, respect, and love, a courageous and loving Algonquin woman. And that line, those 2 lines right there, just, really inspired me as well to tell the story about this remarkable woman, because she had to have lived a remarkable life and have greatly positively influenced the people around her. Very, very inspiring for a priest to write about a woman who recently passed away at the end of the 17th century. That time period was kind of remarkable.
Absolutely.
But to note of a passing of a native woman, non-European woman, I think was even more remarkable. So she had made a great impression. So that there's a story in there. So there's this big gap between the tragedy of the beginning of her life when she lost her first family at the age of 22 to the very end when somebody says she lived a full life with dignity, respect, love, and courage. So there's a wide way you could drive a Mack truck, as you would say, right through. And so I filled that gap.
Right.
And retelling her story.
I love that. And I love, so from the point of her remarrying until her death, how much information do you have that's actual information?
We know about where she lived. Her and her husband moved around a little bit in the area. Her husband, Pierre Cauque, died about 10 years before she did. And they were married. They were together for like 30 years. And I think they had about at least 7 children together, just them, the 2 of them. And by all accounts, they had a very happy marriage, and life together. And she moved back she ended her final days in Trois-Rivières, where she began. And in the stories, especially when you read like the 2nd book and when you see the upcoming 4th book, when that comes out, you'll see how the village that she lived in changes over time of her life, when it was primarily an Algonquin settlement at the very beginning of the story, to a little bit later it becomes kind of a mix of French and Algonquin. And at the very end, it's almost all French. And so that kind of the transition, how her world changed over time.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit then about the series, because I read, just for full disclosure, guys, I read volume 1. I haven't read the rest yet. What transpires like in volume 2, without giving away everything, but like what can we find in volume 2? What can we find in volume 3? And then what's coming up in this volume 4? Okay.
So if you notice if you read the very first story of volume 1, you remember there's a period where Marie Matei Wiawagwe's grandfather gets momentarily transported to the spirit world. Yes. And he sees like a village in the distance. He sees 2 young French women who are dressed strangely from his eyes, who are actually from the early 1900s. And what he's looking at is actually his descendant through his granddaughter. And So you're kind of left that it's kind of left open in that first story. And if you remember you reading it, you may have read that. Well, what exactly is going on here? Well, when you read in a second book, you see that same scene, except you see it from the point of view of the young women that are on the other end. They see
They're
grandfather
looking back.
Charles. They
Yeah.
see grandfather Charles. So that's one aspect. So it kind of ties it in that way. And the primary focus of the second volume is on the family in early 1900s, and the daughter Isala, my great grandmother, and how she met her husband and how they eventually moved to Rhode Island.
Okay.
But the trickster animal characters are also very much involved in causing a lot of mayhem in the village. There's a village festival, and the trickster animal characters kind of immerse themselves right in the middle of it, causing a lot of chaos and trouble. But at the very end, the book, the second volume ends with my great grandparents leaving Quebec and going on to Rhode Island. The third volume is the Dance of Creation, and in that one, a grandfather, an Algonquin grandfather, the same tribe as Marie Mate Wiawagwe, tells the story of the creation of the world to his grandchildren around the fire. And in that story, we learn where all these trickster animal characters come from.
Right.
How they were created,
I gotta really like that one.
Yes, yes. And it's also, the book is kind of worded as a sequel and a prequel. And it's a sequel in the sense that the grandfather, when he's telling the story, he is actually 100 years in our future.
Okay.
So I did that because I wanted the reader to understand that they are immersed in the story, and the story is evolving and emerging all around you. So it's not something in the past. You're kind of in the middle of it. In fact, even you reading the story is part of the story. But then the grandfather takes the readers back to the very beginning of the world and where all those trickster animals came from. Why do they exist, and why they have the personalities that they do.
Right.
And it's a very great book. The next book that's all written, and Natasha is going to be starting to illustrate this month, focuses on the last couple of days of Marie Mate Wiawagwe's life as she tells the story of the attack that cost her first family. She retells that story to her granddaughter. And so there's parts of the story that are very, I would say, dark. Maybe the word is right, tragic, because it really focuses on the attack and how that affected her as a young woman.
Yeah.
How it made her feel, and how she kind of rose above that tragedy to rebuild her life.
Right. Right.
And so anyway, those are the stories. And I really do believe, and I was told this by someone who looked at the books, to be with no uncertain terms, it's going to happen. This woman told me that these books are going to be made into a movie someday. And I said, well, I don't know how it's going to happen yet. She says, don't worry, it's going to happen. It's going to happen sooner than you think. And I really do think that the format itself, with all the illustrations in there, and when we have especially when we have this next book, book 4, volume 4 complete, we'll have a large enough volume of work that we can actually make this into like a short series on Netflix or Apple TV or Angel Network or somewhere.
Right.
It's going to be there, and I'm going to actually try to shop it around. But I'm always hoping, I'm waiting for that call to somebody say, hey, let's make this and let's produce this, because it's a great stuff. It's already storyboard for you. Yeah,
really it is. It's I have novels, and I've had people say to me, oh, that could be a movie. And it's like, yeah, that's great. I have no idea even how to start getting it there. My novels are so far from movie ready, because 90% of what happens in my character's head, and you can't have that in a movie. And so it's like, oh, this would be so hard. But you're right. Yours it's already visual.
Right. Absolutely. It's ready-made for somebody to that storyboarding step that you have to do is already done.
Because you did that in order to get what you've got.
Right. All you got to do is make it, and it's going to be great when it's done. I guarantee
Absolutely.
Because it's very entertaining.
Yeah. So when do you think volume 4 will be out? So 1, 2, and 3 are out.
Mm-hmm.
And then 4.
It's going to be at least a year.
Okay.
This story is like, it's going to be like really just one story in there. but it'll be, I think it's about 13,000 words. And we've got about, I think we're planning on 145 illustrations. And working with Natasha, she looked at that and says, it's going to take me a year.
Yeah.
8 to 12 months to do it. So it's going to take at least that much to get it done. And she's starting this month. So you figure project to the end of 2026. And then it's probably going to be at least another 3 months before it gets reformatted for publication. So probably in the spring of 2027.
You know, a lot of people assume that, you know, you get an idea for a book and that very quickly you can have it out. And even if you're not doing illustrations, it doesn't happen that fast. And when you throw in illustrations, it slows things down tremendously because you have an artist who is working on, you know, they're not slapdashing stick figures together. You know, it's a long process. And then even once all that's done, like you said, 3 months then for all the formatting and the last minute changes and making sure everything goes together okay and getting it all uploaded into the right places and all of the things that go into getting a book produced. It's not an instantaneous process.
No, it's not. And even doing the illustrations, it's my involvement doesn't end when I hand this over to Natasha. Right. You know, we work very closely together. Part of that is I'm giving her feedback and we're sharing ideas. She's presenting ideas to me, so we're kind of tweaking it as we go. But, you know, also I think art is a mindset. Yeah. It's a state of mind. And I have to also be a coach and kind of an encouraging coach to Natasha, say, hey, you're doing great, good work. Right. Because, you know, it's not like you're just building a house, like you're hiring a contractor to build a house and then you just get it done. You have to cultivate the art and the state of mind of the artist, how the artist is feeling. It comes through in the art as well. Right. So my part of it still is very much involved as we produce it, and it's tough work. It's going to take thousands of hours to get it done.
Absolutely. That's crazy. So do you expect another volume at some point or is volume
after
4
volume
the
4?
end? Yeah.
I think I would never say end because I thought volume 1 would have been the end.
I see. Okay.
I thought then volume 2, well, that's probably going to be it. I did it. It's done, you know. And then volume 3 comes and now volume 4. So I would never say it's over. I do have ideas for other stories. For example, in the volume 2 book, there's talking about Isala Meunier's friends, the LaRue twin girls who are kind of troublemakers in the town. Okay. Mischievous, really more mischievous. Yeah. But I have ideas for their follow-on adventures as well, those 2 characters. I have ideas for adventures of when Mateo Uiwagwe was a young girl. Okay. And when the trickster animals first discover her village where she lived. So there's ideas out there. Oh, and I almost forgot. I am actually working on a short, maybe 20-page comic style. So this is more of a traditional like graphic novel style with a comic and thought bubbles. That story is also part of this book series, and that's being worked right now with Masami, the storyboard artist. We're storyboarding it together. And this one's going to take place in the early 22nd century. So 200 in the same village as Saint Honoré, where the first book is set. Do you see it? With the Meunier family. So we're going to set this story at their house, but 200 years later when it's kind of a derelict. And but the trickster animal characters are going to come back. There's going to be, because it's in the future, we're going to have a robot in there inside the house. So we're going to do all kind of crazy stuff, but it's going to be a lot of fun. So, you know, those are ideas that are coming out there. So this is really, it's really developing into a very expansive world of characters and, you know, expansive, and not just the number of characters and the stories and locations, but also through time. I'm going to have stories that take place at the very beginning of the world, and then in the 17th century, and then right on through the 21st century, and then into the 22nd century. So kind of in our future as well.
Yeah. Oh, I love that idea. So yeah, you definitely are creating a world here. One of my questions I think now doesn't even make sense, which is, do you ever consider writing anything outside of this world that you've created?
I think this takes up most of my time.
Yes, that's what I
I
was
do,
thinking. It's like maybe this question isn't.
But as a writer, I do have some other things. For one thing, I have a writers group at the library, and we have a contest where we have to write a horror story, a spooky Halloween story. And the fun of it is that we all pass the stories around without telling who wrote it, and we have to guess which one in our group wrote it.
Okay.
And I won last time. Nobody guessed at all my story at all because it's so different. So I do like to write. I write one horror short story a year. I'm writing some short little fiction stories right now, more for my French class. I write them in French. So there's writing there. And I also had this project that's been kind of sitting on the way back burner where I have characters set in a Greek mythology world, ancient Greece, with ancient gods and goddesses from Greek mythology interacting with some characters in that world. And I have some sketches from Masami. I have some of the stories written, but that's been kind of in the back burner, but not totally forgotten. I think eventually when I feel like maybe Old Grandmother's Tree is done, quote unquote,
whatever that means, right?
Whatever that means, then maybe I'll get back to that one. That one's called Phidias and Tecton. So I have that one. So I do other writings, but primarily it's really been Old Grandmother's Tree.
Right. I know a lot of authors who do series, volumes, expansions like you're doing, sometimes get to a point where they say they're done and they move on to something else. And then a few years later, it's like, yeah, I'm not really done. And then they end up going back to it. So I like your idea of saying I'm never going to say it's complete, because you don't know. You really don't.
Mm-hmm.
After a 2-year hiatus, all of a sudden you'll think, oh, I have another story for Old Grandmother. And, off you go again. So
yes,
I love that. So, hey, guys, if you want to keep this conversation going, head on over to Novels and Latte Book Club on Facebook. There you're going to have a chance to win all 3 volumes. And Joseph has offered to actually provide in your hand copies of Old Grandmother's Tree. So tell me something you liked or learned listening to this podcast, and you will be in the drawing. Joseph, if someone wanted to reach out to you, talk with you about your research, your writing, how you get your illustrators, those kinds of things, what's the best way to reach you?
Well, first of all, visit my website, oldgrandmotherstree.com, written as one word, no apostrophe in there. And on that website, you'll find my biography, Natasha's biography, some extras as a character Wikipedia in there, which is really interesting to look through, and other stuff you may find interesting. And you can also reach me through my email, which is boltonje364@gmail.com. And there's also a link to send me an email through the website as well.
Fantastic. So, hey, guys, all of that will be in the show notes. Run out, grab yourself a copy of this book. You are going to love it. The illustrations alone are worth seeing this. This is amazing. Once you've read it, make sure you run out and give it a review. As authors, we love a good review.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right? Right. And Joseph, I want to thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you, Terry. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.